Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is February 9th. It's Aloha Friday, and we have a new type of show that we want to bring out to you guys. You can see our splash screen there. It says, "What did we just say about AI?" It's one of my favorite thumbnails that I've created so far for the show, just because it made me laugh. It's very much for anybody that has that watches YouTube. That whatever, YouTube is probably like my main source of like entertainment if I'm sitting in my Apple TV, to be perfectly honest. And of course, all the thumbnails are like this. Or
and they're all dolly. They're all dolly.
Yeah, I don't. If you can't see it, obviously, if you're just listening to this, I'm covering my mouth. I'm looking very shocked. I'm pointing at something off the camera, and that's kind of what we did. It's just like it's kind of an overused thing, and it's so ridiculous. I don't. This is not the topic of the show, but it's so ridiculous to me because it'll be like something like I went on a cruise ship. I went on a vacation, but the thumbnail is like. Did it blow up? I mean, I don't understand why we have such a violent reaction on our thumbnail of what going on with my 3 kids or something like that. Anyway, we got June, me, Beth, Carl, Andy. I'm Brian, and what we're talking about today, the idea with this show is not to necessarily do a recap, because you can go back and listen to all the shows, but we thought it would be a good idea. Beth thought it was Beth's idea to begin with, and we all said, yeah, let's jump on this of having our every other Friday be a show where we do look back at the last 2 weeks of shows, because we cover so many topics in AI, but things are moving so quickly that oftentimes we've circled back after we had this conversation. Don't forget, we're learning along with you guys because we don't know what everybody else is going to say on the panel. So sometimes we circle back and we have offline conversations about, we talked about this yesterday and I just found something else about that didn't make the show. Or what happens a lot of times is something is announced the very next day after we just talked about it. So it's just a great opportunity for us to just sort of circle back, talk about some of the topics that came up, new things that came out about it, or just generally what our position, our thoughts are on it. So that's the idea here. We've had, if you take out the news shows, we've had seven different other episodes, I guess, if I did that right. So lots to dive into here. Let's see. Let me look really quick before we jump in. Hey, good morning, Ann. Thanks for joining us today. Let's say I'm Jones for Daily Show content. I'm way behind. Well, hey, listen, we can get you started with that. We'll get you started with that today, and we'll talk about some of the stuff. And then obviously we would love for you guys to go back and listen to some of those episodes. And by the way, I follow the analytics on our show all the time. And for anybody listening to this, we see that all the time. Our numbers aren't always spiked the day that the show comes out. We often will see trails and spikes in some of these shows 2, 3, 4, 5, even a week later in a lot of cases in some of these shows. So we know you guys are going back and listening to them, not necessarily on the day they go live, which is great. Okay, that's sort of the intro. And Steve says he's jonesing as well. Thanks, Steve, for joining us. Jonesing as well. All right, well, look good. Let's dive into that. I know I had a couple things, but does anybody have something they definitely want to kick off with?
Sure, I'll go. So this most recent week, there was a lot of buzz around Google's migration, if you will, from Bard to Gemini, and just how powerful that new model in the advanced form will be. But if we just rewind a little bit to last week, we had a whole show about GPT-5 and what's implied there. So I wanted to just give you a little soundbite about that. GPT-5 it's being insinuated as having artificial general intelligence, at least the early markers of that, although I would argue that even GPT-4 has already shown some sparks, if you will, of that kind of general intelligence, things that, go beyond the simple training. And GPT-5 is reputed to be built on what's called a graph neural network. And we just yesterday had a discussion where I inserted this idea of, in the context of retrieval augmented generation, the idea that, instead of using a vector database, you might use a combination of vector database for, simple similarity search, but also use a knowledge graph as the form of database. And this is related to graph neural networks because really they're referring to the same kind of thing, which is adding some ontological structure to the either the database or in this case the deep neural network. So graph neural network is something that you're going to want to kind of keep your ears out for as GPT-5 gets released, probably very soon after Google came out with their GPT-4 buster, really just match GPT-4 in most ways. So OpenAI is likely to come out with something that's really powerful and likely formed on a graph.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think we definitely probably should do a show. I was trying to decide if we should swap out what we had in plan for our next Friday show and do a deep dive into Gemini or make that its own show. But either way, we're going to cover Gemini next week at some point because I think it's really, really important. Now that we have access to it, and by the way, with Gemini, that's not going backwards, it's kind of looking forwards. But since you mentioned GPT-5, I kind of do feel like they kind of go together. Not that they're the same thing, but GPT, Google came out, they did it to themselves. And they came out and basically was like, they put out this ridiculous video that was all hype, and we found out later on that it was highly edited, and it made it sound like the guy in the video was literally having a real-time conversation with Gemini Ultra. Now let's just cover Gemini Ultra really quick because this is confusing. There's Gemini Advanced, which is their paid version of Gemini, and Ultra is the name of the language model that they built it on. So if you were using Gemini Advanced, you're using Gemini Ultra. That's confusing, just like Copilot. We'll get to that in a second. But I do think it's really interesting, Andy, like you were saying, we were talking so much about what's this future of GPT-5. Well, the whole thing Google came out with was saying, hey, this is, we built this from the ground up to be truly multimodal and, yada, yada, yada. And they had all these buzzwords that went along with it. So it'll be interesting to see what is that response with GPT-5. We don't have any dates on that. We don't even know if it'll be this year. We were talking about that on the show. But, did Gemini Advanced, aka Ultra, just rise to the level of GPT-4? Did it surpass it in some ways? And what is the logical next step for like a GPT-5? I'm really excited. Obviously, we're all excited about, about what the next thing is, but I don't want that to GPT-5 to overshadow that. In fact, this may be a good coming out story for Google. This may, I haven't dug into it enough. We'll talk about it next week, but I don't know about you guys. Like my initial reactions to it is like, there are some hints of some really, really cool stuff in there.
Let's always remember that while, Carl, has, a bit of a chip on his shoulder because of how long Google kept him out. Google, the fanboys of Google, always have recognized that Google is really the center of excellence for the development in at least in its predecessor, DeepMind, which it acquired, right? DeepMind was really, and Mustafa Suleyman, that's the fellow who founded DeepMind. That really is where the first really truly amazing large language models and sort of GPT oriented advances were made. So Google built Transformer, like with its DeepMind division. It built what transformers are. OpenAI has superseded it in many ways, at least in the commercial application of it. But anyway, Google, I'm a fanboy.
Yeah, and look, we'll dive more into that next week. Let's move on to some other things that came up in the last 2 weeks for us. Jimmy, I know you were mentioning you have one or two things you wanted to talk about.
Right. I want to take a few minutes to basically circle back a little bit before our Monday show on just the status of deep fakes and what's being done. And what kind of steps legislation has been taking. So I'm sure everyone is familiar about the event with Taylor Swift and on Twitter about releasing a bunch of deep fakes around her, and the debacle of how slow Twitter was to react to that kind of thing, and what steps that both here in the U.S. and in other countries have been taking towards addressing deepfakes and particularly AI generated deepfakes now. And so there was a couple of things I wanted to highlight. In the last couple of days, the FCC actually made it illegal to have AI generated robocalls. So it doesn't cover the broad spectrum of what what kind of deepfakes there are, but it is a step forward in that direction, especially as the 2024 election is heating up and things like that. So now companies and organizations, it's very clear that they don't that is illegal now to use AI cloning in any kind of automatic calling. Also, one of the things I wanted to highlight was there is legislation in the U.S. There's a couple of acts that's going through the process now. In the U.K., they had the online, I think it was like Online Protection Act. That's been going on since October. In the U.S., there was some protections both for just celebrity and protections for just any non-consensual AI generated deepfakes, imagery, likeness, and things like that. But one of the things, and I think Andy mentioned this in our previous show, is the C2PA. So they're a private organization that they're a nonprofit that their main mission is to help identify or provide provenance for imagery, likeness, and things like that that are distributed on the internet. And this is a coalition of various tech companies and media companies like the Content Authenticity Initiative and Project Origin. Different media companies like the BBC belong to that, and different tech companies like Adobe, Microsoft, they belong to that initiative as well. And what they're trying to do is create a provenance system or a metadata system that can identify the source of images and likeness and other forms of media that you're going to see online.
Like watermarking.
More credibility.
Like watermarking AI generated stuff.
Exactly. And towards that, we also mentioned like OpenAI and Meta are going to be doing labeling and watermarking and things like that. It's definitely not perfect and it's not foolproof, but I think it's a good indicator of addressing the problem. And with all things with technology, the tech comes out first and society struggles to catch up with it. So, but I just wanted to take the couple of minutes to highlight that, yes, this is a recognized issue, and yes, it's starting to be addressed. But until we have laws in place, and until we adopt certain standards or whatnot, you are definitely going to have to be more cognizant of what you're looking at and what you're reading and things like that, and just make sure you do your due diligence for that information that's coming out.
I think too, Jimmy, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, isn't it? Like, I mean, the minute it's like a lot of things with technology, the minute a law comes out to try to suppress or not suppress, but manage one part, it pops up over here and you're just, you're wildly swinging to try to do it. So I like what you said at the end there, which is that, I wouldn't even say until laws. My answer would be here going forward, we all have to look at anything online, anything that's being circulated, that's video. I mean, today, not like some date in the future. They're already good enough. If somebody is dedicated enough and wants to take the time, is motivated enough, if there's enough money behind it, perhaps through other countries or just people who are motivated to do so, we know that now there can be deep fakes that to the naked eye are unrecognizable from being reality. And so there's going to have to just be more due diligence from everybody to say, does this seem off? Does this seem wrong? How would I go check this to see, sites like snoops.com have been around forever. I'd imagine they will continue to be looking into things that are instantly put off as fake. And then, something we talk more about on Monday, and we can move on here, is the other side of it, which I think I mentioned on the show when we talked about this, is that the other side of it is now there's plausible deniability to everything. So even when somebody says something or does something that's inherently grotesque or not great, now their PR firm can immediately jump on that and say, absolutely AI, absolutely fake. It never happened. It's being circulated. Somebody has it out for us. We see this in politics. We see this in other areas. And I think there's just as much of a problem with the other side of it too, because if everything could be fake and AI generated, then how do you prove when things truly are real and a problem,
Which is why I think that in some ways the watermarking and all of that stuff that came out, so we're going to put something in the metadata, is a little bit of a Band-Aid. I mean, it's like a PR ploy from that, because those are bypassable. And really what we need to be doing is increasing media literacy. So when you see something, the first thought is maybe not, how can I detect whether this is a deep fake, but how can I look at this as who is benefiting from this? And that's the challenge with the distribution platforms, because Twitter X benefits from a viral, holy crap, everyone wants to go look at this. So it's not really a surprise that it took that long for it to come down, because that was Twitter's business model working. Right?
Yeah.
And if it's,
and then you have the news outlets too, like in the States, at least for anybody that's listening to the States, you have your CNNs and your Fox News, and I'm not picking sides on that, but they always have been, it's about the clicks, it's about the sensationalism of it and stuff like that. So even what's problematic is even that they're going to make a news story about it so that they then show the fake ad, and they're saying on it to cover their own butts that hey, this is probably fake. It's probably got a watermark on it or whatever. And that kind of gets brushed aside. But there's the image, there's the video of whatever it is. And Beth, you and I have both talked about this, which is, it's one thing to see words. It's quite another to see the face and hear the voice and see the likeness of somebody saying something. And I think you really made me think about this. I think it was you, Beth, that said this. That sticks way more than words on a page. If you see me saying something and you heard me say it, and it sounds like me, and it's got my vocal tones, it's my voice and my face, and you heard me say it, even if we know that's fake, what damage or what stickiness is that doing to us on the back end? And you can say, just like we said before, forget about that didn't happen. But can you just erase something like that? I think there's some big questions coming up.
Because we are neural networks, right? So now I have a little piece in my neural network that's a memory of that then I really need to try to make the closest association with it. This isn't true. Don't pay attention, right?
Oh, no,
and that is true.
I find it very easy to forget what you guys say right away. I'm like, what? Now what?
Fair point. All right. Well, listen, we got more stuff to go over. I have one on Copilot that I can share just really quickly. And it's actually, we talked about Copilot 2 Mondays ago, and Microsoft has been making big moves there. Obviously, there's latest news about Google, but that's not to say Microsoft doesn't have a lot of stuff coming out. Case in point, they paid for a Super Bowl ad. I don't know what the going rate is for a Super Bowl ad, but it's always in the millions for a 30-second clip. This is actually a 1-minute clip, so double that price, about Copilot. So for our listeners, I apologize in advance because I'm going to run this, but go watch us on Spotify or YouTube so you can see the full clip, or just go look it up. But I want to talk about this after I share it really quick. And let's see, to share this, to make sure that we can hear the audio, it's got to be a tab, right? Anybody?
Yeah.
It has to be a tab. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. 1 minute here. Can you hear it? Yeah.
Good morning.
Watch me.
Just watch me now. Just watch me now. Some for you, a little more for you. You won't believe your eyes. Just watch me now. Got some for you, a little more for you. You won't believe your eyes. Just watch me now. Just watch me now.
All right,
So
so pretty
A
cool
bunch of
ad
that was
there.
communicated in text. So
Yeah, I know. I know. Basically, I'll try to do this really quick. It says they say I'll never open my own business, or get my degree,
or make my movie.
They say I'll never make my movie,
Yeah.
or build something. They say I'm too old to learn something new, too young to change the world. But I say, and then you hear the girl say, watch me now. And then that's the first 30 seconds. It kind of works as its own ad. And then the next 30 seconds is just fast screen shots of people typing into Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, help me with my chemistry homework, help me design something, my next logo for my big business, help me write code for my 3D game, help me do this, help me do this. And then there's one little clip on there where it's like, sure, I can help you with that. And then the last thing it says at the very end, their tagline is Copilot, your everyday AI companion, anyone, anywhere, any device. Pretty powerful. I got to give them credit. That's a pretty good commercial. And what I found interesting, and I was saying it right before the top of the show, before we went live, is that except for them, I'm too old to learn anything, right? Anything new. Everybody in this commercial is young, like
20s,
20s. And Steve just commented, targeting a young demographic who don't tend to have budget control. So this is either shade that they're not in control of the budgets in businesses, or like young people will buy things. I'm not sure which this is going for, but both are true.
And Andy, you said something interesting to me too, is like, it's funny, right? We think about Microsoft and we think about enterprise and 365 and all these like big products that any of us that have been working in business and corporate and all that for years and years and years have been using the products. But my daughter's 13 and her school only has, like, through the internal school system, it's all Microsoft products. It's always Excel. It's always PowerPoint. They've had the hands on at least a US education for years. Years and years.
Apple has an iPad-oriented approach to education as well. But you're right. Getting the young generation to adopt AI in an encompassing way through mobile devices. Copilot is on mobile, and a lot of the ad was showing people using their phones to access that. That's a lifelong, attachment that could benefit. Excuse me, I'm just going to buy some Microsoft stock here.
Wait. One second here. So, thinking about it further, it's not like you could just buy this, but you'd have to buy Office 365 for yourself, and then it's another, I would imagine, Copilot Pro. I don't know if there's a student discount.
Copilot's free though on their basic.
No, right? it's a free mobile app.
Yeah,
but it's basically 3.5 with some 4 options, but they'll downgrade you in high traffic.
Well, see, I don't think. Okay, so I think it's actually a safe play for them, because data we've seen so far clearly says Gen Z is the biggest AI adopter, right? So I think it's they're less focused on, pointing out that, like you said, it's like 3.5 instead of 4, or, it's got elements of each. I think that isn't their target. I think, like what we mentioned before the show, the target is to absorb the non-enterprise. We know Gen Z uses AI the most. Well, let's get them all on Copilot instead of using other environments. And that will lead to them necessarily adopting more Microsoft products. So Brian, you mentioned the Happy Meal effect. Get them early. They'll start using more Microsoft and then start wanting to use more Microsoft. Once you're in the ecosystem, it's hard to leave. It's hard to
Yeah.
change platforms.
I don't know. Like, I'm a little skeptical on, because I feel Gen Z's a lot smarter than we were, than like millennials or like Gen X boomers. I feel like they're more discerning than, oh, they can recognize it a little bit more, like, oh, I should just go to Copilot. Are we talking about just Copilot like what used to be Bing? Or are we talking about Office 365 Copilot? Because that
Not
one,
this
that's where I was
This
confused.
commercial is not telling them they have to pay anything. So this commercial is basically pointing to the free side. Now, we could do a deep dive as somebody. We are looking at AI all. It'd be interesting to look at all the examples they show. But if I just did a really quick overview of it, everything in there could be done on the free side. There was nothing that required the paid side based on their search criteria.
And by the way, the free one uses GPT-4. That's one of the things that Microsoft puts out there.
Right, but they also put a thing that says, but we'll downgrade you in
They'll
terms
throttle
of
it, right?
high. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
they
okay.
throttle it. Yeah.
They do. Okay.
So, Carl, I get what you're saying here, and I agree with you that like Gen Z, really, millennials and stuff like that, incredibly savvy. You're not going to pull the wool over their eyes with this type of stuff. So it's an interesting line what Microsoft is trying to do. I don't know if they'll be successful. Will Gen Z balk at this and be like, that's cheesy and that doesn't speak to me or whatever? I mean, I'm looking at it as somebody who's 46 or about to be 46. So I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool. I appreciate something like that. Is it the same as the big, the big anvil? Well, not the anvil, what was it being thrown at the screen? The famous Apple commercial.
Oh, the sledgehammer.
The sledgehammer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And they run in and it's very dystopian and the dome. And that was a Super Bowl ad, if I'm not mistaken, right? That was a huge Apple ad. Is this at that level? And Beth, I think you put in the comments that it cost them $14 million for this one minute ad during the Super Bowl. But think about how many eyeballs are going to be on that.
I do remember last year though.
Throw up Anne's comment about they're playing to the old people who want and relate to the view of those younger people actually being in the emergence of their next phase of accomplishment. Well, even at my advanced stage, I like Anne say, oh wow, it's working for me. Like I like that image rather than saying, okay, here's a guy with an accountant's cap on, using Microsoft Copilot. That would not appeal to me as much as this does.
And that may go to Steve's point here. And Steve says, funny thing, I try to get young people interested in AI tools, and they tell me it's only for business and they're not interested. This commercial is clearly trying to not push that. They're not like, hey, make a better Excel spreadsheet. It's like boring, but help me create my next 3D game. That sounds interesting. And I'm not trying to stereotype or say like that's all Gen Z cares about. That's not true, obviously. But help me start my own business. Help me be my own solopreneur. Help me, create. We've raised a generation now of creatives. My daughter is a creative. Whether she ever goes on and she's like known as that, she's been raised in an environment at 13 years old that makes her a creative. And so are millions of other kids who are coming up through this generation. Right. And I think this is smart because like Microsoft is saying, hey, come be yourself with us, with our tools. You can be who you ultimately wanted to be. You're no longer held back by maybe your restrictions of being able to write, or maybe you're dyslexic, or maybe you have always felt held back because you couldn't do great grammar. You weren't a great speller like I was never as a kid. Maybe you can't draw anything, but you have amazing ideas. Hey, come use Copilot. We can be your buddy here and help you do things. Right. That's
Let's
sort of
remember
what
that Microsoft is partnered with OpenAI. And so the underlying models here are all already available to those people who are early adopters. But what Microsoft is doing here is weaving it all together with a huge advertising budget that OpenAI might be able to deploy, but they're all focused in on the advancements of their large language models. So now Microsoft's going to take that partnership, OpenAI plus Microsoft, and bring it to the masses.
Yeah. I know we spent a lot of time on that. I apologize. I thought that was gonna be a shorter cover, but it's really, really interesting to me. I want to get around like Beth. I know we randomly talked with you and Carl. Did you guys have anything from the last 2 weeks that you like kind of wanted to circle back to?
Yes, Carl has a thinking face though. What do you got?
You go first because I kind of just lost my train of thought. I was
Okay, awesome. So in the cancer show, I said come back today because we're going to have some information about whether the government is using AI. And in fact, Catherine Young, who is the Assistant Director for Cancer Moonshot Engagement and Policy, was part of a Library of Congress panel discussion in early December. And they are absolutely focused. And she highlighted 4 things that AI could help cancer scientists and patients, right? And we talked a little bit about that, help radiologists diagnose cancer and get results to patients faster, quickly processing large quantities of data, streamlining discovery and testing for less toxic and more personalized treatments, and evaluating the effectiveness of new drugs. So we had a conversation about the large quantities of data and are they putting together a clearinghouse? And the answer to that is yes. There is a national database of information that comes in and then is available by API and a couple other ways of doing that. So it is, of course, like an optional thing, right? Like there's no mandate, but it is absolutely recognizing, the government is absolutely recognizing that they are in a great place to be able to have a centralized repository for data that then everybody could access, or everybody with a low E, right? Like not everybody,
Right.
but everybody who would like to access it in that researchy kind of way. So the answer from that show was yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
I think that was the only thing I wanted to add is just like every single, I think like the one thing that's undercovered, and I know we covered one episode about it, is every single week you can kind of see the predictions get better in terms of like, I think cancer first, but I'm really, I don't know, excited is the word, but like a lot of the advancements in medicine, just talking to a couple of doctors too, who are like, initially when we talked about AI, didn't really care about it, but now, and they're local doctors, right? The information doesn't usually trickle down that far, but they're starting to hear more and more and more. And it's affecting some of the way that they're the medical communities are being planned for the next 2-3 years because of this. And so that's pretty exciting that like, and there's a lot of hope from patient side, from doctor side, that's like, hey, we talk a lot about, things that we can do, productivity, efficiency, that kind of stuff. That for them, the big underlying thing is like, if we could, the early detection and soon to the ability that the masses can maybe even detect it themselves, which is unheard of. And if you really think about how big that would be for so many people early in their lives, like whether you're 20 or 10 years old, you're like, I can detect if I will have cancer of this. And here's the preventative measures. Like how many people and lives will be saved with that? That to me is like, when we talk about game changers, mind blowing, that's the game changer, mind blowing.
And we're talking about it in terms of cancer because that was the show.
Yes.
But there have been some stories before AI of like people with rare diseases coming together and doing massive fundraising to be able to create some treatment and that kind of stuff. And if you have a motivated population who are willing to share their data, their medical data and experiential data, now you can be your own researcher, right? Like, I mean, you don't need a whole research lab to take that on right away. You can do the preliminary stuff that says, we have these things that look like they might be effective. Let's, how much money would you need to run this study? Right. We have, and that's something that happened with long COVID actually during the sort of the height of the pandemic in some ways. There was an initiative like, okay, I have we have all of their information like collated. And again, that was before AI. That was before AI was being used in this context to be able to say we can really shorten the lead up and the amount of time that it takes to analyze.
And then you add agents to that, like
Oh,
that ability.
Yeah.
That now that becomes amazing.
Oh yeah, and it's all fields of science too. Like I was reading an article where this one research group devised what they're calling like RoboChem, and they combine an AI model with a chemical analysis process robot, and they can do thousands upon thousands of analyses, whereas just having a scientist do the analysis, that would only be like in the dozens. But now they can do it thousands of times on top of it and discover new chemical combinations, and which could lead to new drug treatments and all these kinds of things. So I think across the board, we're just seeing all of the mundane part of science, the day-to-day need to test A and B, trial A and B, all of those kinds of things. That's where AI just shines. It's because, yes, I can do the robot task. That is not a problem.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to a company called Trial B. It's a good chance you've probably never interacted with them, but they help manage clinical trials and get people into clinical trials for new advancements and stuff like that. And they just have a really great. I know the CEO at the time right now, but they just have a really great business, and I think they're one of many, 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 just one that I happen to know, that are really leaning into what AI can do and how it can affect their business and stuff like that. So I think there's so many cool stories like that of really good companies who have the best intentions of helping save as many lives as possible, and they're seeing how AI is going to continue to open the doors, not just in cancer, obviously, but
Nice.
all different levels of health. Hey, I wanted to mention really quick before we sort of maybe wrap up, unless anybody has anything else. But something cool. I can see all the data on for Spotify, like I was saying, and stuff like that. So like yesterday, or what today? Today's the 9th. Yesterday, believe it or not, we had our single highest total plays day ever on Spotify. And the reason I want to bring this up to everybody, not just something we would talk about offline, is that like I was saying, we have people coming in and listening to some previous shows. Well, one of the shows we had was talking about vector embeddings. That was just yesterday. What's cool, though, is seeing that how our audience, and I just want to say thank you to all of our early adopter audiences. Not only are you an early adopter of AI, you're an early adopter of the Daily AI Show, and we're just very grateful for that. Because what's cool to see is that when the show about vector embeddings went up, there was also people who listened to the breaking news story show that came up the day before. But then we had plays of people going back and listening to our episode about installing an LLM locally on your own computer, which was a few weeks ago. So it's cool to see how you guys in our audience are going out there and listening to the show and saying, oh, that was really interesting, maybe about vector embedding. And now I have questions about LLMs. Oh, maybe there's something else I can listen to. So just want to say thank you. We just passed 4,000 views. Today is episode 135 for us. We passed 4,000. These are just Spotify numbers, so it doesn't take into account all the other platforms and stuff like that. But just something cool. And I thought today was kind of a cool show to bring that up. That, we're growing. We see the numbers. We see you guys out there, even if we're not talking to you all the time. But, you're continuing to subscribe and follow numbers continue to go up. And we're seeing days like yesterday that had the single highest play date of any day since the beginning of this show. And that's just super cool to see. So not really necessarily about the last 2 weeks, but sort of about where we are right now, and as we continue to grow, and I can't wait to see where these numbers go. Okay, anything else? Anybody like last?
Thanks, y'all. Come back next week.
Yeah,
What are we doing on Monday? Come find out.
Yep, exactly. Okay, I don't on my screen. You caught me off guard, Beth.
Sorry.
Hey,
We will definitely be talking about Gemini Ultra Advanced Google
Age of
stuff
Ultron.
next week.
Yeah, they'll all happen next week.
So check our page.
Yeah, I got it.
Aloha.